which we started a couple of weeks ago, which has to do with the Ummah Olam, the differentiation between the Jews and the Gentiles, the Goyim, to get some kind of an understanding of what the entire structure is all about. And there are a lot of ideas to it. Like I said, it's quite a long, drawn-out exploration of ideas. And at the final conclusion, we should have a much better grasp in terms of some of the principles of what govern human history itself. Because ultimately, the principles behind human history, why activities happen, have to do with the nature of who the Goyim are, who the Jews are, their peculiar relationship, and their ultimate destiny. As I said before, basically, I know to those who recall about the origin of the Goyim, we gave a brief rundown on some of the key ideas of how it started in the first place. And as we have said before, the world started with Adam Harishon, with the first man. And that man was given a specific ability and a specific objective. So what you have is a certain subject was created. And that subject was given a certain ability to achieve a certain objective. What you see in human history is that this formula keeps on changing. Who the subject is, what the ability is, and what the, in a certain sense, the objectives are. But that's basically the formula that we're dealing with. And briefly, I want to mention what that is. The first subject that was created was Adam Harishon, the first man. And he was given a certain type of ability to achieve a certain objective. The objective that he was to achieve, as I said numerous times in the past, is to transform the physical world into a spiritual world. That transformation would take place if he would observe the first mitzvah that he was given, not to eat from the Eitz Hadas. He was told not to eat from the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and he was tested in terms of his allegiance to God, to Hashem or not. That nisayon, or that test, was essentially the instrument that would give him the power to transform this world into a different world. The instrument was such that if he would observe that mitzvah, that commandment, he would draw down to him a certain amount of spiritual power to his neshama, a certain kedusha into his neshama, which he did not possess before. And with that kedusha, he would be able to transform physical substance, the substance of his body and the substance of the world, into a different realm. And that realm is called Olam Haba. Essentially, that is a uniform realm. We live in a realm of two substances, of a spiritual substance in combination with a physical body. So therefore, we live in a world, our world is present, Olam Hazeh, which is a state of constant conflict and tension. Because we live in a world of two different substances, each substance attempting to go in its own direction. You see, people say that God creates conflict in a certain way by creating certain types of problems or setting things in different directions. That's not what it was. The conflict which exists in the human personality, the conflict which exists in his drive, is nothing more than a conflict in his substance. All the Baruch Hashem had to do was create two types of substances, each one attempting to go in a different direction, to fulfill itself in a different way, merge them together, It's a one aspect of consciousness, and what comes out is a being who exists in a state of conflict. You see, it's very natural, the consequence of really natural forces. The Buddha did not give you a Yetzer or a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination or an evil inclination. That wasn't necessary. Those inclinations are essentially consequences which emerge from your basic being, the structure of your being. Hence, as a human being, you cannot avoid the nature of conflict. It's impossible. That's what it means to be human. To be human means to be constructed of multiple dimensions. To be constructed of multiple substances means to be in a state of conflict with a tendency to either adhere to one substance or the other. And the job that the Buddha imposed on them was to submerge or dominate one substance to the other. And it was his choice. Either allow the physical to dominate the spiritual, or the spiritual to dominate the physical. And depending on which one would dominate, that would issue an entire state of affairs. So when Adam, therefore, was given that task, the Buddha says, I tell you, listen to what I say, cling to my spirit, cling to the aspect of spirituality, of ruchnius. Cling to that, and by so doing, you will enhance the power of your spiritual substance or your neshama, bring down new power, and it will dominate the physical world. How does it dominate? Because its kedusha, its substance, has the power to irradiate physical substance and transform it in a way which is utterly amazing, which has never been experienced since the beginning of time. Never. It's utterly amazing to watch such a thing. And I don't know if there are many parallels to that. To see literally one substance suddenly converting another, transforming it. Maybe in physics and chemistry, I'm sure that there are parallels. What? Well, that's the same substance. Right, that seems to go from one state to another. But from one substance to completely transform another is an amazing thing. And to watch someday the human being being totally transformed in front of your eyes is an astounding thing. To literally, you just watch yourself, see your body suddenly change in terms of its substance, and begin to sense the presence of spirituality right through the body is an awesome, awesome event. Once, that was the ability that Adam Rishon was given, to create, transform. Now we know what's the word, the Hebrew word that refers to the process of transformation. Yes, what? We all know the famous word? Zichur. Mezacheh comes from the word doch, pure, to purify. That's the word that means transformation. Zichur. And the ultimate goal of Adam was to have what's called Zichur Aguf. The transformation of or the purification of the body, means all physical reality. This is the ultimate objective. Zichur Aguf. And the reason why that's the ultimate objective, because Zichur Aguf, or the ability of a man to transform his physical world by clinging to a higher source of spirituality, is what creates Olam Haba. The power to do that lies in his neshama. It lies in the neshama. Adam was given the neshama that has that power. Adam failed to do that. He failed. So not only did he fail to elevate or transform physical reality, but he brought it down. Because not only did he fail to acquire a new source of Kedusha, but he also submerged his spiritual force into a certain thing called Tumah, a certain new type of force, which is called Tumah, or impurity. And this, in essence, interferes with this process. He said in several different ways. I'm not going to go into that. He said that it interferes with the process with the neshama, and it destroys the ability of both physical and spirituality to affect each other. The neshama could no longer transform because now it was covered or was under the domination of a new force which would slowly absorb spiritual energy. So the neshama would never have the spiritual energy really to be able to do that. And the second thing was that the physical world was deadened in a way, or made much more gross, much more coarse, so that it would no longer be responsive or sensitive to spiritual powers, it would no longer be elevated. That's the destruction of this possibility. So we went into quite an extensive thing of what the implications of that for our life and human history. But we will now go off in a different direction. Once Adam failed to do that, then the Baruch Hashem says, I will now disperse this task, I will now dispense with this, and I will rather give this task to all the children of Adam and his generation, so that no longer would one man have that responsibility, but that responsibility would now be given to many men. So, in the first stage of human history, we have a solitary figure, Adam Rishon. In the second stage of human history, we have the human population growing. The sons of Adam, Cain and Havel, Cain and Abel, and the sons Sheth, beginning to populate the world. Havel was killed, of course. So between Cain and Sheth, his sons populated the world, and mankind began to grow. But the unique thing is that when you examine all of mankind at that point in time, which is a long time ago, over 5,000 years ago, all of mankind, with respect to this formula, this key, you see, essentially was the same. Meaning that where the subject before was Adam Rishon, he was the subject, and he had the ability of the neshama to transform physical world, that was the objective. That power was now given to his children, all of mankind, his descendants. So the subject was changed from one person to a population. But essentially the ability remained the same, except, as we've explained before, that whereas Adam Rishon alone was able to transform his body and all of physical reality, one man, his neshama was so powerful that he had the ability, the kind of kedusha necessary to make that transformation single-handedly. What changed was, it was no longer single-handedly. It had to be done now by many people, so that all the people who lived in the world at the time had a specific share in that process, shareholders in that process. But all of them were the same. They're all homogeneous with respect to that ability, you see, except that each one had just a different area, whatever it was. So all of mankind was the same. All of mankind were essentially people with very great neshamas, very great souls, all having the ability, if they would exercise that ability, if they do the mitzvahs which are required, which in this case are 7 mitzvahs, the 7 mitzvahs of Noah, because whereas other Rishon only had 1 mitzvah, you see, the peoples of that time had 7 mitzvahs. And by the achievement or by the fulfillment of those 7 mitzvahs, you see, by the achievement of those 7 mitzvahs, they would do what Adam could have done single-handedly. Okay? This was at the beginning of mankind. This was mankind at its outset, a long time ago. It's a funny thing, it's an awesome thing, because when we talk about how many years ago, the world was created approximately, without going into specific details, somewhere around 3,670, I think something like that, BCE. That's when the world was first created. The world is 5,747 years. If you go back, you see, it comes out to approximately somewhere 3670, something like that. You see, Adam lived for 930 years. So Adam lived till about what? Something in the area of 2700 BC. That's when he died. And his children, Noah and so on, lived much further down, 2300 BC and so on. But the amazing thing is that the pyramids of Egypt are as old as those people. It's incredible that if you stand and you look, for example, at the first pyramid of Egypt, called the Step Pyramid, which is outside of Giza, that was supposed to have been built, I believe, in the year 2700 BCE, which means that that pyramid was built by those people who were of homogeneous nature, of mankind, including the Egyptians, all the people at that time. Here you see a living monument built by those people. The Great Pyramid itself of Giza, you see, built I think about 2400 BCE, was before the marble, it was before the flood, which is an astounding thing, you see. And it was built by people who essentially were part of that group of mankind. So you think that we're talking about, you see, people who are far away and we have no relation, these are some kind of a strange superhuman beings and so on. But the truth of the matter is, we can gaze at some of the specific works which they actually have done, you see. And that what we think are the ancient Egyptians, you see, and we think were very, very primitive people in that sense, were really the people who were maybe 1,000, 1,500 years after evolution, who had these enormously powerful abilities. Now I'm not going to go, we spoke a lot of times about the differentiation of mankind according to a Guf Neshama ratio, and there's much greater spirituality which existed then. I won't go into that, but that's all implied here, you see.
Yes. Just to clarify, when we say the Egyptians were 2,700 years BCE, we mean in our time frame, just like, which is the same time frame that we use when we say certain rocks were 2 billion years ago, right?
Yeah.
It seems like there are two different time frames that you're presenting in that discussion.
No, why am I saying these different time frames?
In other words, it's Torah's time frame, which is 6,000 years, and time is finite. And then there's the way we...
But I'm talking about historical dates. What is the difference in our historical dates?
Well, in other words, if I said I found this rock and we date this rock 2 billion years,
you have
to operate on that to put it in the Torah time.
Is that how they dated the pyramids?
No, they say 2,700.
But how did they date those pyramids? They dated the pyramids geologically? I don't think so. I don't think that's how they dated the pyramids. I think the pyramids were dated in a different fashion. But I hear your question, but I don't think they were dated that way. I'm not sure. But I don't know, were the pyramids dated in that way?
It just seems like anything that we talk about, either historically or archaeologically or whatever,
that's a good question.
Go through some kind of conversion into Torah time.
Yeah, right. Okay, it's a good question. How were those things dated? What happened to that society? Those people who lived in the earth at that time, again, rebelled against the Bnei Shalom. They refused to elevate their spiritual natures, and instead, they elevated their physical natures. So, the Bnei Shalom therefore decided to change the entire situation into a different scheme. And as I said before, what we have ushered in now is what's called the heterogeneous stage of mankind. And what it was is that the Bnei Shalom decided, with the beginning of a man of Rome, with him, the Bnei Shalom decided to change the series of acts. And what he did was, he said the following to Avram, that I'm going to change mankind into two separate units. Up to now, all of mankind was homogeneous in the sense that they all had the ability to mezachech, to transform the world. They all had that ability. But I'm going to change that, and I'm going to change this ability so that from Avram, only from your descendants will they have that ability. And as far as the rest of mankind is concerned, they will lose that ability. But I'm not going to do it yet. The Bnei Shalom waited, except that he told Avram that already, because of the fact that you have remained a tzaddik, and all the other peoples of the world have not, they worshipped idols, and they did all these different things in a sense to rebel against my commandments and what I've said. So therefore what it is you have already been elevated. Meaning that from now on, your ability to transform is completely different than their ability to transform. So that in the time of Avram, we see the beginning of the heterogeneous stage. Whereas only Avram and his descendants, his children, have the ability to what? To transform the world into an Olam Haba. Avram retained the ability from Adam Rishon to do that. By being a tzaddik, Avram retained that potential, you see. All the other peoples of the world lost that potential to a certain degree. How much they lose it? That's very difficult to say. But what's very clear is that Avram possessed a great deal of it. So that already, Avram and his descendants were no longer like the rest of the peoples of the world. They were not like them anymore. Because they had the ability to create an Olam Haba. Now, did the other people of the world have the ability to create an Olam Haba? Yes. They still did. They still could in their own way do that. Except that the potency of that ability was significantly diminished. So here you begin to see mankind becoming differentiated with respect to what criteria, not in any racial or ethnic way, but in terms of an internal, intrinsic nature that's not visible on the surface. If you look at Avram, you look at somebody else, you couldn't see that ability. You would say, well, they look like two the same people. What's the difference? You see, if you looked at anyone from Ur of the Chaldees, where Avram was born, and you looked at him, you couldn't tell that difference. Yet there lay in that person's being that total difference. Because the difference was in their neshamas. That's why. The essential difference, or this ability, lies in one's neshama. And that's not visible at the surface. The Buddha maintained that heterogeneity, meaning that all mankind still retained the ability to produce an Olam Haba, but at different degrees, until Matan Torah, until the Torah was given in Har Sinai. And at that point, the Buddha went around to all the nations of the world and offered them the Torah, and they all rejected it. So the Buddha says, therefore, what I'm going to do now is change the situation. I'm going to make from Avram and his descendants, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and all his descendants, which were the 600,000 Jews, well actually the 7 million Jews that appeared at Sinai, from them they will continue the original task of Adam Rishon. What about everyone else? Everybody else, it was removed or confiscated. Meaning that of all the other peoples of the world, they lost their ability to literally determine the ultimate spiritual destiny of the world. And they lost it forever. It was closed. So what we see is an amazing thing, that at the giving of the Torah on Sinai, we see the creation, not so much of the Jews, but of the creation of a new type of mankind that never existed before. Because really, what is a Jew? A Jew is nothing more than the continuation of Adam Rishon, of the first man, meaning that he submits to the same type of power, the same type of ability. He has the ability through his mitzvahs, by clinging to the Baruch Shalom, by connecting himself to spirituality, to holiness, and attempting to what? To develop the sense of that which is high. He has that ability to ultimately affect all of reality. The other peoples of the world no longer have that ability. That's why they are referred to as the Goyim, or the nations of the world. They do not have the ability at all, you see, to create an Olam Haba. They only have the ability to affect their own destiny, but they have no control or effect about anything that goes on in the spiritual world. What does that mean? That means a very, very important concept. When a Jew goes out and he does a sin, when a Jew goes out and he does not observe the Shabbat, when a Jew goes out and he eats something which is not kosher, he is doing more damage, you hear, than when a Goy goes out and destroys an entire city. Why is that? It's an astounding thing. Why is that? Because a goy, since he no longer can transform the physical world into an olam haba, is imprisoned in the physical world. In the sense that his abilities cannot transcend his physical actions. So the best he can do is destroy or build physical worlds. But the Jew, because his neshama is connected to the spiritual world, to the entire spiritual realm, which is much vaster than the physical, he does one hate, he does one sin, and he has enough power to damage millions and millions of worlds, spiritual existences, just by that one hate of what he did. He has the ability to alter tremendous configurations of spiritual forces and powers. You see, it's the same thing when he does a mitzvah. So that a person, a Jewish person, is not aware of the enormous power which he carries. You see, he's not aware of that power because that power is already concealed. But if you could see the power of your deeds, if you can see the power of your mitzvahs or your chatoim, and you can see what it does to the configuration of the entire universe in terms of all its spiritual structures and aspects, you would be astounded at the degree of your power.
If Goyim have neshamas, and neshamas are ruchnis, from the realm of spiritual, what is it about them more specifically that takes away from them their power?
We're going to discuss that. We're going to get to that. I'm going to try and get to that. I want to discuss that more precisely, how that happens. Okay. But first I'm just giving the overview. Do we understand it? So therefore, this is called the exclusive period of history because the Jew and the Goy were separated. Meaning that mankind was differentiated in different degrees. According to what? According to their ability to transform the world. So that the Jews retained the ability of evolution and the rest of mankind lost. At Mount Torah, at the giving of the law, the Torah at Sinai, for the first time an entity called a Goy was created. An entity called a human being who had no ability to affect spirituality was created. That was a whole new creation. Such a thing never existed before. Since the beginning of creation, since the creation of other nations, there has never existed a person who has no spiritual powers. Because in essence, a person is the neshama. His essence is spiritual. And suddenly to see the what? To see the introduction of a being who has no spiritual power was extraordinary. But that's exactly what was done in Matan Torah. So, therefore we see that whereas as the stage of Adam and by Avram, you see, before Avram and after Avram, the subject was changed, but the ability and the objectives always remained the same. But in the time of Matan Torah, what was changed was not only the subject, but the ability and the objective remained changed also. So that these people now no longer had the ability to do what they could have done earlier. I think this is clear, yes?
Did you talk something about 7 million before?
7 million?
Several million.
Several.
Yeah.
Well, in Mount Torah there were several million people.
If their neshama is delayed, then if they convert, how can that even affect the neshama?
It does. The one exception to this rule, which is what we're bringing out, is that it is possible for Goyim, you see, to recapture that ability by conversion. If a Goy becomes a Jew, it is possible for them to recapture that ability, which means that when a Goy converts and becomes Jewish, there is literally an alteration of that person's neshama. Literally, except that it's not visible on the surface. There's got to be. Because how can a person who is what? Who is simply a being who has certain spiritual aspects but in no way can affect the spiritual world. how could such a person suddenly come into doing mitzvahs and affect an Olam Haba? Obviously the neshama was totally altered, you see.
So it's not really recapturing, that's why it's converting, it's changing.
It's changing, it's an alteration, right? Now, I think, I don't remember, but I think last time I spoke, we went into more detail about the Goyim itself, about what they're, didn't we? So let me just briefly say that. Now, the question that we must ask is if that mankind was differentiated at this point, and for these reasons, you see. So therefore, what do the Goyim have? If the Goyim don't have any more the ability to create an Olam Haba, then what do they have? The answer is that they have Olam Haba. In other words, what the Baruch Shem said was that since you are not capable of establishing a permanent existence, you see, I will allow you at least the ability to establish a temporary existence. Meaning that I will allow you to enjoy the essential satisfactions which accrue to Olam Hazeh, or this physical world. So what the Baruch Shem did was, he allowed the Goyim to succeed and prosper in the physical aspects of the world. I don't mean raw physicality, but I mean even in the artistic aspects, and even in what's called the pseudo-spiritual aspects of psychic powers and meditative powers. He allowed them to excel and to succeed in those ways, you see. Why? Because the Baruch Shem basically said that the Goyim should at least be entitled to a certain level of satisfaction. And he gave them that level. And in order to be satisfied, in order to be successful in that way, the Baruch Shem said that they also have to keep mitzvahs. Because the Baruch Shem does not give a human being, no matter what his ability, anything for nothing. The nature of man who possesses a self means that he possesses an area of self-free will, which means that the Baruch Shem will not give any human being anything unless he earns it of his own accord. Which means that even though the Goyim, you see, are essentially concentrated on what? On physical processes, cultural processes, but even to be matzliach, to be successful in those areas, they must also perform the 7 mitzvahs. They've got to keep certain basic commandments of homicide, of theft, of believing in God, of setting up administrative, judicial, civil systems of government so that they rule themselves in an orderly way, laws against adultery, and so on. So these essential laws must be observed by the Goyim. If the Goyim observe these basic laws, then what the Baruch Shem says is that I will let them prosper. I will allow them to prosper and to succeed in this world. But if the Goyim do not observe these, so that they abuse even these laws, and they act in ways which are essentially totally obnoxious and arrogant, which is their want, throughout history, essentially that's what they do, then the Baruch Shem says, I will confiscate even that, and they will have nothing. Now when you look at mankind, when you look at civilization itself, for example now, you see that essentially, even in the Gentile nations, or in the nations of the world, there seems to be certain nations of the world which essentially are quite prosperous. America and the European nations, you see. And if you look at the entire third world, you see tremendous devastation. When you look at Africa, you look at Asia, what do you see? You see a lot of devastation.
What about the shift now in Asia?
What's that?
Japan,
yes.
Korea.
Some shift, right. But first let's get the principle. The peoples who are involved in these parts of the world, who have no hatzlacha, who have no prosperity, you see. It's interesting because a great deal of that world is steeped in some kind of idol worship, or some kind of worship of very primitive forms, you see, which is a direct contradiction to the 7 mitzvahs that they were given. And it is no accident, really, that you find that a great many of the nations of the world who are impoverished, you see, are the very self-same nations of the world who have essentially ignored the basic tenets of what it means to be a human being. You see. Now, there are many... Now, I'm only speaking in very great generalities over here. Please don't come up to me and say, well, what about this nation, or what about that nation? You know? No one can answer for a specific nation, or specific peoples, or whatever have you. But in general, we know this to be true. We know that a nation can predetermine its own destiny, depending on to the degree that it adheres to its humanity and its rationality. And to the degree that it abdicates from that, to the degree that it worships what? Idols and stones. To the degree that it's involved in homicide and theft and violence, you see. To that degree we'll begin to experience enormous impoverishment and devastation. Now there are exceptions to this rule. I don't want to go into the exceptions. Because we will find that there are certain nations that have been horrible and are very, very successful. Like Germany, for example, you see. Or Japan, you see. Certain nations that have been quite homicidal in the past. I mean, Germany is a boost, they started 2 world wars. And yet they're among the most successful nations in the world. You see. So the question is, why are they able to do that? Well, that's because they are connected to a wholly different principle. I am talking now about the principle of justice. The principle of mishpat. Justice. We are talking about strict din or justice. According to the strict justice, these are the essential principles in which God governs mankind and rules them and judges them. There are exceptions to that because there is another principle that works in the world which has very little to do with justice directly. And it's something we will go on later, and that's of course the principle of yichud, whose essential function is to see that the world survives. And how that works with the goyim, we will to explore much more precisely in the near future. But from the standpoint of justice, okay, these are the criteria. Now, another question that we've asked is that if the Torah is so important, and if the Torah is the centerpiece of all creation, why is it that most of the world doesn't know anything about the Torah at all? Never heard of it. Throughout time and throughout history, most of the nations of the world don't know anything about the Torah. And if the entire world was created for the sake of the Torah, why is it that most of these people don't know about it? The answer is because they don't have to know about it, because they're no longer involved in this ability. In other words, the essence of the Torah lies or addresses the man who has the ability to transform reality. That's who the Torah addresses. To a man who essentially has lost that privilege, to what? To a person where that ability has been confiscated from, no longer needs the Torah as we know it. He no longer needs this entire discipline. So what the Bereshit does is he gives that people or that nation a different culture, a different morality, which has certain parallels to Torah, but is no longer involved in that. So that, for example, in the entire Chinese civilization, there arose a man called Confucius. And from Confucius, a great deal of the morality of China comes from, you see, and so on and so forth. And they give many of the important principles of human and civilized behavior, you see. Because the essential purpose of a goy, as a goy, now, you see, is to basically be a civilized human being. To be kind, beneficent, compassionate, and to be a mensch in his behavior to other people, and to recognize, you see, the divinity of the Goy Shalom. That's the essential thing. Given these basic principles, then he can go ahead and attempt to prosper from this world to whatever degree is not clear. He can benefit and satisfy himself from the physical world, you see, and from his own artistic and cultural aspects. That's true. The purpose of a Jew is not that. The purpose of a Jew is to become an elevated human being. The purpose of a Jew is not to become civilized, That's not the purpose of the Jew, to become a higher, civilized, rational person. The purpose of the Jew is to become a spiritual being, to become a person who connects and becomes aware and sensitive to spiritual forces, to become conscious of spiritual aspects, you see, who develops a very unique relationship with the Baruch Shalom. So that there is specifically a one-to-one relationship between that person and the Baruch Shalom through the mitzvahs of the Torah and through the understanding of the Torah. So therefore the purpose of a Jew is to become like a malach or like an angel, and the purpose of a goy is simply to become an elevated human being. You see the difference? It's like I said last time, we have lost the meaning of what it means to be Jewish. We have lost the understanding of what it means to be Jewish. Because essentially we think today that to be Jewish is to what? I said this last time, is to get up, is to go to work, to come home, to relax, to open up the TV, to go to a movie, to enjoy ourselves, to eat well, to buy new clothes, to buy better cars, to live in a better house, you see, and also to go to shul on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, and so on, to do a mitzvah here and there, to put on tefillin if you're a man, and so on. That's what we think it means to be Jewish. That has nothing to do with being Jewish, really. That has to do with being a Jew, you see. 1%, and an American goy, 99%. That's really what it is. Because we look at life exactly like a goy looks like, because the truth of the matter is, that is really what a goy is about. A goy really is that. A Jew is a person who really, what does it really mean to Jewish? To be Jewish? Well, in order to really see that, we've got to go back 100 years, unfortunately, you see. And we've got to see a person who's essentially involved in different type of wisdom, in acquiring a wisdom of the ultimate principles of what governs reality. To understand what? Specifically, what kind of relationship he has to have with the Baruch Shalom. And the one who begins to raise his consciousness, literally, from one level to another, so he begins to see and understand things which are beyond normal rationality. As I've said also in the past, in the time of the first place of Mikdash, over 1 million Jews were Levium. There were over 1 million prophets that lived in the time of the first temple. And we know what a prophet is. A prophet is someone who is able to automatically connect with the highest levels of spiritual forces, and not only to see the future, but to see all kinds of mysteries and secrets which the Baruch Shalom holds back from mankind, and to literally to peer right through the seventh heaven and to understand what's going on up there. Forget about what's going on down here. To understand the current events of how God governs the entire world, simply to look into it and see what the Baruch Shalom is doing with all the world and with all of mankind. That's the kind of view, or the kind of seeing power that a Jew really has when he's really Jewish. Therefore, this is what I'm saying. Right now, the best thing we can achieve is to be a little Jewish on top of a goyish life. We really don't know what it means, really, what it have a Jewish life. And unfortunately, we really will not know that in a clear form until the Mashiach arrives. But we once did know, and it's important for you to know, that what the Goyim lost at Matan Torah, well, you think, well, what did they lose? What was the big deal? You see, they still have a nice time. You see, if the Goy keeps himself straight, he can have a great time. What did they really lose? The answer is, that great time which you can have is only minuscule to what a Jew can really experience, if he can experience what a Jew really is supposed to experience. And number two, the Goyim can only have this time for only a short period while they live on this world. Because in general, the Goyim do not have the ability to go to Olam Haba. That means, astonishingly, you see, that most of the Goyim that we see, who do not abide, who are not really either converted to Judaism, or who are not exemplary in terms of their own 7 mitzvahs, will not be in Olam Haba. And that is an enormously frightening prospect, really. Now there are people who have brought up the concept, and they said to me last week, a couple weeks ago, but this sounds like discrimination. That's what this sounds like. People have said that to me. They said this sounds like discrimination, you see. It sounds like you're separating mankind into different parts or sections, and you're discriminating. You're saying that one part of mankind is what? Is vastly superior to another. Well, what's the difference between that and any other form of discrimination? And I say to you that the difference between this form of discrimination and that lies in this word called justice. Why? When you take people who committed murder and theft and committed violence and you throw them in jail, is that discrimination? Why not? Why is that discrimination? The answer is, you say, because simply they have gone where they are because they deserve it. We're not throwing a man in jail because he's black or because he's yellow. We're not throwing a man in jail because he's black, because he's yellow colored. I'm not throwing a man in jail because his IQ doesn't reach what? 150? I'm not throwing a man in jail because what? Because he doesn't make over $50,000 a year? That's discrimination.
This is the mess.
Discrimination is essentially when you what? Discrimination is essentially when you do what? Discrimination is when you consider an essentially neutral characteristic and you force someone to that neutral characteristic. If you look at a person's race or his origin, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You see, if a person goes out and commits a crime, you see, you stop them. Not because you're discriminating against them, because you have to what? You have to administer justice. Which means that fundamentally, the only quality which escapes discrimination is what? Are your deeds. Is what you do, you see. And you earn what you do. Essentially what the Torah says, and this is the critical point, is what the Torah says is that there was a point in time in history when men differentiated themselves in deeds. You see. They chose to do it. The Bereshit didn't say, well, I don't want you to have anything to do with Olam Haba because you're black. Because the Bereshit went to the African tribes as well. The Bereshit didn't say, I didn't want you people to have anything to do with Olam Haba because all you people are stupid, you're not bright. This is absurd. It's the Bereshit who makes people their color. It's the Bereshit who gives you your intelligence and so on and so forth. But what the Bereshit says is the one thing which I judge mankind is not the given. It's not what is given by heredity or what is given by the model that I give him, but essentially it's done by what he deserves and earns on his own efforts, because that in essence is why a man is similar to God. That is the parallel. The parallel between man and God is that man has the ability to choose freely, you see, and to do. And on that basis the person judges him. And there was a point in time when mankind differentiated itself according to its deeds. That differentiation, or that discrimination, if you want to call it, is based on mishpat, on justice. And essentially what the Goyim said is that we don't want your Olam Haba, because we don't want the effort which is involved in acquiring it. We don't want to go through this process of transformation. We don't want to leave this world. We like it here. It's a nice place. You see, we don't want to go through the effort of what? Of having to what? Having to control our impulses. We don't want to control our impulses. We don't want to have to follow certain rational codes. We don't want to have to listen to what you tell us. That's in essence. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I don't care if he's a God or anything else. That's the essence. I will run my life the way I want to run it. You see? And no God is going to tell me what I have to do, and where I should go, or what I should eat, or when I should eat, or what I should wear, or what I should carry. You see? So the Buddha says, it is your choice. If you want to reject me, if you want to reject my will, you do not want to understand what it is that I'm saying, or why I'm saying it, if you do not want to examine the true nature of your relationship with me, if you do not want to understand that I am God and that you are human, but you insist in what? In creating an illusion that you are also somewhat like God, because you have powers and you can control, then that's your choice. And on that choice, you will not get an ultimate spiritual existence. Because what is Olam Haba? Olam Haba essentially the future life. Olam Haba is nothing more than what? An awareness of the complete majesty of the Baruch Shalom. But in that time, that awareness is the essence of pleasure, and it's the essence of satisfaction. You see, it's not that we're going to sit in a place in the future world and observe the magnificence of the Baruch Shalom and its incredible power and say, this is incredible, and sit there to the end of time with that kind of an observation. It's not a museum where you stare at a painting and say, well, that's really nice. You see? The Baruch Shalom is not a planet which you observe through a telescope and you say, how awesome. This is not what's going to go on forever. But that's the essential principle, the essential thing, and you've got to grasp that, is that every physical satisfaction that you have now, every one of them, without exception, essentially is nothing more than the perception of God. That's what the whole mystery is about. And that's why it's so deceiving. You don't know, you don't understand that every time you're involved in some kind of physical activity, every time there's some kind of sense of pleasurable satisfaction, is because in some way you are connecting, you are perceiving or relating to the power of the Baruch Shalom, but through the body, through the guf. Hence it's invisible. You see, you don't know that it's His power that you're really enjoying, because it's in a physical form. If it's in a physical form, you don't know that it's really the power of the Baruch Shalom that's really creating that satisfaction. And since it's in a physical form, there's an illusion that somehow it has nothing to do with God. And it has to do with me. It has to do with my body. My body gives me the pleasure. But the basic principle is that there is nothing in all creation or all existence that can obtain any kind of satisfaction unless in some way it plugs into the power of the Baruch Shalom. And we have discussed this before at greater length, that I'm not going to go into it, that it really plugs into the concept of yichud. That it is His yichud, or His unity, His absolute unity, which essentially is the power behind all satisfactions in the world. In Olam Haba, in that world which is transformed, you will experience exactly the same thing you experience in this world. Isn't it strange? Except in that world, it will have no barrier. Because the body, even though you will wear one, will be like a suit of clothes. It will have no presence. It will have no mind unto its own. There will no longer be a substance called body, as we know it. Therefore, it will have no pressure. It will have no impulse. It will have no direction. The only direction will be that of the neshama, which completely then dominates the guf and wears it like a suit of clothes, which means that the neshama will therefore be able to pierce right through the guf and plug in directly into the power of the Baruch Shalom and experience the same things you experience now, but without a guf, you see, without that, and on the highest magnitudes. So therefore, the hanos, or the pleasures of Olam Haba, will be in certain ways similar to here, except that we won't eat or sleep or do the things we do here, because these are bodily interpretations. Rather than the neshama will experience its own type of pleasure, which is infinitely more powerful than that which the body does, of course. You see, if you go into what? If you are outside in the sun and you experience its warmth, right? Isn't there a difference than what? If you go inside the house and you experience the warmth through the window, can you compare the two types of satisfactions? Really? the same thing. The experience of the Neshamas Olam Haba is like the body directly in the warmth of the sun. And the experience of pleasures of Olam Hazeh is like the body in a house where the rays and the warmth and the heat of the sun come through a window. You see. But that's exactly the thing. Because when you live in the house and you look at the window, you say, well, look at all this beautiful power. That's right. Where is it coming from? It's coming from the window. It looks like it's coming from the window. But it's really coming from the sun outside. That's the difference between a Jew and a Goy. You say, well, the Goyim ought to be envied. Because look, they can do all these things by hectare. You see, I have to watch what I eat. I can't eat what I want. Can't eat meat after milk. Can't do that. Milk after meat. You gotta wait a couple of hours. I can't eat what I want. I can't eat any Chinese food or Italian food. I have to eat meat that's only shafted in a certain way. It's gotta slaughter, you see. It's gotta come from certain types of animals. I can't eat all these exotic things that Goyim can eat. I can't eat shrimp and I can't eat lobster. Because the Torah says you're not allowed to eat these things, you see. And I can't do all these things that I want to do, you see. On Shabbos, I can't run around and go outside and do whatever I want, you see. What I do on Shabbos, I have to devote myself to spirituality. But it looks like the Goyim have free reign, you see. It only looks like that. But that's a tremendous fallacy. Because even what they have temporarily. They have it now. Because when Goyim said to the Baruch, we reject your will, we reject what you tell us, and I will control my life, the Baruch says, then you will experience, just like you reject me, and you want me to disappear, I will disappear. You're right. So that you will experience me only through your body. And that will be the only thing you'll ever see of me. You will never know my power as it is, you see. You will only know it as you are aware of it through your body. And that's it. Hence, you will only experience it while you live now. And once you are no longer alive, you will no longer be, you see. You will not be in a position to know what real simcha, what real joy is. You will only know that through your body to the greatest extent that you can feel it through your body. And that's a very, very small extent. So the Baruch Shem did meter connected meter with the Goyim. Measure for measure. As you reject me as the source of all existence, and the source of all true striving, and the source of all true happiness and joy, as you reject me, that will be your lot. You will have a certain type of satisfaction in my absence, but not in my presence. Not really in my absence, because the Baruch Shem is not really absent, but relatively in my absence. Because when you enjoy my power through your body, you enjoy a minuscule fraction to what you would normally understand and perceive and relate to when that body was no barrier. And only the Jews will attain that ability to transform that barrier. That's why the Jews really are, in a sense, if you really think about it, are the ones on the biggest pleasure trip. You see. In the sense that they're smart. You see. Because let me ask you on a choice. What would you rather do? If I offer you a choice now of potato chips and candy now, or a 7-course dinner 2 days from now, but I ask you to wait. You see. What would you rather have? So the Goyim say, well, this is it. This is the best it can be. So they're running after the potato chips and candy now. But the truth of the matter is, what the Baruch Shem says to the Jews is, wait. Show me how you consider my will. And you will experience the true joy and the true simcha, where it really is. The joy beyond the body. Not that you have to die for it, because the truth of the matter is, Adam wouldn't have had to die if he didn't sin. But the Baruch Shem says, I will allow that body to disappear in terms of its impulse, and in terms of its power. That's what the Baruch Shem says. So that's really what it means to be Jewish. You see, I'm not standing here talking about some kind of historical facts, about some interesting facts of mankind, going through the different positions of mankind, from Adam to the homogeneous stage, to Avram, to the Matan Torah, you see, as some kind of interesting history. The result of all this is a difference in species. The difference between a Goy and the difference between a Jew is a difference in species. It sounds incredible. What are you talking about? This Goy right next to me is exactly like I am. That is an incredible mistake. He is not. It only appears that way. You see. Because this Goy does not have the neshama, you see, which can do what you can do. But it's all hidden. And therefore this Goy, unfortunately, does not have the ability to access true simcha and the true power of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Only temporarily and in great, great hidden forms. That's what it means to be a Goy. So if all you people look out in your window with great envy, you see, on the Goy Shabbat, and you all want to become part of it and join in, so to speak, you know, like, hey, wait for me. If that's what you're really thinking about, and to be Jewish is a burden, it's an obligation, you see, it's a yoke. Like I say, it's like schlepping an anvil from here to Albany. If that's how you're really looking at it, you have no understanding of what it really means to be Jewish. Because Judaism is not simply the observance of certain mitzvahs. Judaism is a state of being. Judaism is an eternal state. It's an ultimate destiny where you will access and become privy to a series and to a level of understanding and ideas and satisfaction which is unknowable in this world. Literally unknowable. And that is not discrimination. Nobody is being discriminated. If the Jews are chosen, it's not the fact that they're chosen because they're superior in any other quality. If they were chosen, it's because they are superior by virtue of choice, by virtue of free will. That's how they're superior. It is true. The Jews are superior. They are the greatest of all the nations of the world. Why? Because they have fought for that right. That's why. Just like a man who fights his entire life and becomes a multi-millionaire, feels a certain right and a certain privilege because he worked for that money, right? He really worked for that. He feels that he's earned it in some way. It is the same thing. If the Jews have the right to be called the chosen people, it's because they've worked for it. That's why. They've worked for it by reason of choice, by reason of deed. Not because the Rebbeinu Shalom discriminated against them. Because the Rebbeinu Shalom would never discriminate against anyone. All mankind are his children. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the father of all men. He's the creator of all men. And you think in the Rebbeinu Shalom's eyes there's really a difference between a Jew and a Goy in terms of their intrinsic values? Of course not. You think the Rebbeinu Shalom tolerates the difference between a black person or a white person? But it is the Rebbeinu Shalom who made them both? You think the Rebbeinu Shalom is sympathetic to discrimination? In any sense? Of course not. The black person is as much his creation. It is much, in a sense, his son. And that white person, there is absolutely no difference. So in terms of what the Rebbeinu Shalom has given to men, there is no selection. But the one thing that can discriminate is in terms of what you give to God. That's the difference. What you give back, that's where the discrimination takes place. Just like there's a discrimination between a tzaddik and a rasha. Do you think the Rebbeinu Shalom discriminates between a tzaddik and a rasha? Of course not. Not at the outset. The Rebbeinu Shalom looks to both of them to do what they have to do. And he doesn't care what they look like or what's on. He looks at their hearts and he looks at their efforts. You see, he doesn't predispose himself in some discriminatory fashion. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not a God of the Jews as such and not a God for the Goyim. Chas v'shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the God of the Gentiles as much as he is the God of the Jews. Or you think that the Rebbeinu Shalom is less of a God to the what? To the Tibetans than he is to the English? Of course not. That's absurd. In terms of what the Rebbeinu Shalom gives, in terms of what he's mashpia, what he gives, there is no difference in his creation. What makes a difference is what you give in return. If you give your allegiance, if you give your work, your oivers, if you struggle to relate to the Rebbeinu Shalom through your deeds, and another person does not, that does distinguish. But that's not a discrimination because of him. He didn't do that. You did. You see, that's in your hands. not his. That's what we mean by justice. That's mishpat. It comes from you, not from him. And on that basis, the Baruch Hashem has discriminated in the sense that he has judged the world and he has found that the only people who think they give a damn are the Jews. Everyone else doesn't really seem to care. Yes.
Are you saying then that metaphysically that the Goyim are structured the same as we are, that there's no difference in the nature of their neshama?
Now there is, but at the outset there wasn't.
Okay. So can I ask something else along that line? It seems like you could distinguish between Abraham and Matan Torah in the sense that Abraham, on his own merit, discovered the Yichud of Hashem, right? He discovered. But what I want to ask about Matan Torah is, did Hashem reveal himself to the Yidden, and because they perceived his revelation, therefore they were able to say Na'aseh B'Mishma, and he, in other words, did the Yidden merit a revelation, or was there a revelation that brought them to Na'aseh B'Mishma?
No, they said Na'aseh B'Mishma on their own terms. They could have said Nishma B'Na'aseh, we will understand and then we will do. They said we will do and then we will understand. They said that on their own terms.
So it wasn't really in response. That was not a response to
It's what they brought, you see.
Well, after the 10 plagues and that sort of stuff.
Yes, but still, it's a long thing. Essentially the Jews merited what they did. From what they went through, from what they maintained and what they stuck to.
What about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?
That surely is a question that's favor. Surely what was done. The question that we will have to explore, and we're not going to explore it this week, we'll explore it next week, is the question that two things we have to explore. First of all, how does a person go from this stage to that? How does a person become a goy? How does a person who really once started out as a Jew technically become a goy? What happens to him? Please. That's what we have to discuss. What is the mechanism? How does the thing transpire? How do you make from a person who has the ability to transform a physical world to an Olam Haba, how do you make that into a person who no longer has that ability at all and is now called a goy? And the second thing that we have to discuss is another important question. These were the goyim that existed a long time ago. So why are the goyim today responsible? Why? In fact, many times you will see goyim, right, who are very decent human beings. They're very decent human beings. And yet they're goyim, and they'll never convert. So why should they be held responsible for something that their ancestors did?
And the other side of the coin also, why, if you're born of a Jewish mother,
well, the same question.
It's not on your merit. It's not
the same question, right? Either way.
Yes.
Exactly. In fact, many times people will say, you find that a goyim that are more better behaved and more mentioned than Jews. Unfortunately, that's what it is. For example, what's the question you can ask again? A goy, for example, who's a very decent person, who's a very honest, upstanding person, who's better, him or a Jew who essentially is not from, or he is from, but disregards honesty and whatever story is, takes advantage of other people,
Right.
Who is better? And the question is, why should that goy be worse off than that Jew? That's the question, right?
Yeah.
That's a really good question.
Goyim who believes in Olam Haba, I know it may not be our concept. If there's an Olam Haba, among Goyim, but what is that? Now, we may not be able to do.
What is their concept of Olam Haba?
Yeah.
We don't convert goyim. We don't go on converting goyim. They go on converting us. Why? For a basic reason. Because a goy can earn Olam Haba. He can earn Olam Haba in two different ways. Either by converting and becoming a Jew, but we discourage that. But a goy can earn Olam Haba in one way while remaining a goy. And how is that? If he abides by the 7 laws, the 7 commandments that he's given in a very exemplary way. If he does that, then he can also earn Olam Haba. He can. Those are called goyim who are very big tzaddikim. It's possible for a goy to be a tzaddik. It is. And a goy who is a tzaddik, the Baruch Hashem does give him an Olam Haba. But there is still the difference between an Olam Haba of a goy and the Olam Haba of a Jew. There's a vast difference. And the mashal that I always give, basically, is that in Olam Haba, since the goy does not have the ability to transform and create Olam Haba, he can't do it on his own, which means that he has to wait for a Jew to do it. Meaning that he has to benefit from the world that the Jews have created. So in other words, there's a whole difference in real estate here. A Jew has the ability to build a house in Olam Haba, a goy can only rent. Now, but the question that remains really is why? Why are the goyim responsible now for that? Why shouldn't in some way they bear that burden that their ancestors gave them? Okay? That's a really question we want to understand it. We will go into that question at length next week, you see. And in order to understand, you have to understand something about the internal structure of mankind. But what we're showing here is the essential overview of the situation. And what is the difference between a Jew and a goy? There is a critical difference, not only in ability, in terms of objectives, but there's a critical difference in terms of what it means really to be Jewish and to be a goy, in terms of an ultimate destiny. And it's important to grasp to some degree what that difference really is.
What about the 95% of our people that don't observe anything, and
that's something we will have to discuss again also.
And they ridicule people that do, and they think, there's all kinds of remarks.
The picture is more complicated, just like any picture is. But this is the beginning of the structure of that picture. Next week we'll begin to go into also more length and begin to examine also the different types of peoples which exist on the world and why they are the way they do. Because, like I said before, mishpat or justice is not the only standard in which the world is compared to. There is another standard which has the power to offset it to some degree, and we will have to explore that later on. To offset there's another midah called yichud, which has the ability to offset that. We will discuss that much more at length. But essentially, we are now talking in terms of strict justice and analyzing the essential judicial origins of the nations of the world and why they are.
What is yichud?
We'll get it.
Just tell me the English.
Hanavat yichud means the attribute of unity. We'll have to get into it at a different time. Yes.
Oh yes. Yes,
I gave a whole shiur last week on.
Perfect.
Let me ask you, who wants? I didn't say anything yet.
That shows you the eagerness.
It's not eagerness.
Hoshana Rabbah.
Who wants a copy of the tape of Yom Kippur? Remember the Yom Kippur tape I gave you that day? Heavy shiur. That thing. So let's see.
Rosh Hashanah too.
Rosh Hashanah too?
Yeah.
And Sukkot, the last one. I gave a very good shiur on Sukkot and
It's awesome.
So next week I'll give you credit. Yeah. I we have a big problem, but you have to be ready out. Unfortunately, Eli is not here, and I'm fortunately, but I'm having problems now with the reproduction of the tape, so I'm not sure. No, I have none. And also I have to get his machine. His copy machine. And he's out of commission, so I have to get his machine. I spoke to him. Hoshana Rabbah, as I've mentioned before, the Hoshana Rabbah is a very unique Chag, and just basically the aspect of Hoshana Rabbah which is very important is there's a minhag where we take 5 arovas and we bind it together. There's a 5 branches more, a willow tree, and we bind it together, and during the davening, at a certain point in the davening, when we say the Hoshana, we then kind of bend down on the floor and we hit the ground 5 times. Now that was a minhag that was started by the Nevi'im, by the prophets. And that minhag is so great that the reason why Rosh Hashanah cannot fall out on certain days of the year. It can only turn out on 3 or 4 days of the week. Is because if Rosh Hashanah would fall out on certain other days of the week, Hoshana Rabbah would fall out on Shabbos. And if Hoshana Rabbah fell out on Shabbos, you could not do that. You see. So therefore, it was more important to have Hoshana Rabbah fall out on a weekday so that you can do that. You can bang those Hoshanas on the floor, then have Rosh Hashanah fall out and let Rosh Hashanah fall out on the Shabbos so that you can't throw shofar. Imagine that? It's an astounding thing. You see. Now why? Well, we went into the whole thing last week, and I just think about the meaning of Sukkot, and we said that Sukkot basically represents the whole period of time which will be in the Messianic period. And we spoke about the Lulav and the Esrog, and the Lulav and the Esrog have the ability, basically the power, to withdraw the Kedusha, which lies in the hands of Goyim and in exile, and draw it back to the Jews. It's like a weapon. It's a spiritual weapon which has the power to reabsorb lost spiritual power, you see. And the whole Sukkot is nothing more than a complete symbolic mechanism of the Messianic period which allows us to restore or to bring about that Messianic period. The Lulav and Esrog allows us to literally bring about a state in the world when the Jews again go to the top and the Goyim are submerged under them, which is the proper way it should be, rather having the Goyim dominate the world and the Jews being at the bottom because of their sins. What this Lulav and Esrog does is invert the state of the world. It has the ability to invert the political state of the world so that it's totally reversed. And by doing that, issues in the Messianic period, which is similar to a sukkah, you see. And we discussed last week that in the sukkah, it's a certain dwelling where you devote yourself to higher spiritual pursuits, and so on. So in certain ways you attain certain levels which are similar to the times of the Messianic period. But we went into a whole thing, and I'm not going to go into further that. The Hoshanas themselves, which you bang on the ground 5 times, right, have similar powers as the Lulav and the Esrog. And what essentially does is that when Jews do sins, they lose the spiritual force which enables them to transform the world. But that force is not simply lost. That force is transferred to a different domain, in like a warehouse or storage keeping, until the Jews in some way can restore themselves with that power. And where it's gone, it goes into a domain called Tumah, or the forces of Tumah, or the forces of evil. And it resides in that domain, and it empowers that domain with enormous ability. And that's what you see in the world today with the Goyim. They take their power from this source. But we'll go into that much more when we go into the Goyim. You'll understand much more precisely. The Hoshanas have the power of breaking that domain and the exile domain. When you bang on the ground 5 times, it has the power to crack and break the chains which hold that Kedusha. You see, so that eventually the Kedusha begins to return to Klal Yisrael. That's why that minig is so powerful, because that banging on the ground, which of course is only symbolic, has the spiritual power, which is of course invisible, to break the chains which hold the Kedusha and prevent the Messianic period from coming in. That's why Hoshana Rabbah, the whole day is devoted to Hoshanas. And Hoshana, Hoshia means to redeem us, to save us. And essentially the whole concept of Hoshanas is basically the ultimate request on the Baruch Hashem to redeem the world and usher in a Messianic period when a Jew really becomes a Jew. And not when a Jew, you see, looks like or lives like a Goy and externally is a slight shadow of what it means to be Jewish. It's a total annihilation of the current world order and a restoration of a world on a much higher spiritual level.
Yes. Why do we need a separate action aside from the Lulav and Esrog?
The Lulav and Esrog, it has different directions. The Lulav and Esrog address themselves. The Lulav and Esrog address itself, it seems, towards the this way. You know, it's like, for example, you have a certain amount of money, right? And somebody steals the money from you, and then he goes into a bank, right? And he puts it into a safety deposit box. He's got your jewels in the safety deposit box, right? Now, what you can do is, there's two different ways. What a luminescence does is really, it has the power to break through the whole steel vault and open up the safety deposit box, so then you can just walk in and take it out. You see, the Rishonos have a different power. That power is really to disrupt the entire bank management. So that suddenly they themselves open up all the doors. In other words, the Rishonos have the power of addressing the management forces itself, the forces which hold the whole thing. Not so much the repository of it, but rather the intrinsic forces which literally are the vessels which just hold the whole thing in place. So there's somewhat of a difference, you see.
What is number 5?
Yeah, 5. Well, it's a whole long discussion. Fine. We'll have to do it at a different time.
Why? It's Friday.
Don't worry. We have to do without having it. But that's essentially what it does on that. On the in terms of Shmini Atzeres, which is the last Yontif of Sukkot, that's a very unusual Yontif. And to give you the essence of that Yontif, the Gemara says a very interesting thing, which is it's probably one of the noblest of all the Tovim. But you have to be on a certain madriga to understand that Yontif. What it is that the entire month of Tishrei, which is this month, you're involved in some kind of interaction with the Rebbeinu Shalom. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Right? In other words, the whole month of Tishrei is an incredible month for spiritual prophecy. Because when you have some Yom Tovim, in all the month, right? So like the whole month of Tishrei, you're involved in what they call the Jewish high holidays, in a sense, but you have many, many Yom Tovim. Now what happens right after Sukkot, or rather right after the 7th day of Sukkot, technically, what should happen is that's the last of the holidays, you see, and then there's no other holiday until Pesach. You see, Hanukkah and Purim were added later on. But without Hanukkah and Purim, there's nothing doing until Pesach, from a Yontif standpoint, you see. And what happens is, and it's a very understand is that since the Rebbeinu Shalom and the Jews are so closely involved in the month of Tishrei, what happens is that at the end of Sukkot, the Rebbeinu Shalom gets Kaviyachol depressed. I said Kaviyachol anthropomorphically, meaning that the Rebbeinu Shalom says, you know, it's hard for me to separate from the Jews through Pesach, so I want to add one more Yom Tov.
Oh, how nice.
That's what the
Gemara says.
Really?
Kosher, it's an incredible thing. The Gemara says, Kosher Olai Pidaschem. The Rebbeinu Shalom says to the Jews, Kosher Olai, it is hard for me to bear your separation. It's like a husband, yes, it's like a husband who sees his collar and rejoices with his collar, but somehow he has to go out of town or whatever the story is, and it's hard. He says, I'm going to stay one more day, 2 more days. You see. Which shows you that Shmini Atzeres is among the highest of the days, because Shmini Atzeres is a day which literally is the expression of the love of the Rebbeinu Shalom for Klal Yisrael, for the Jews. You see? And there is no real other Yontif that has such a naked, open expression of that. All the other ones express that in different forms. But in its total open form, you see, the intense love that the Rebbeinu Shalom has for the Jews, you see, and for those who relate with him, that's contained in that holiday of Shmini Atzeres. So when you keep that holiday, you have to realize that this holiday was given only, you see, because the Rebbeinu Shalom could not separate himself.
Wow.
That's a very exalted. But in order to that's not an easy thing to be aware of. You have to be on a certain level. You have to be on a certain level with the Rebbeinu Shalom just to understand that. You see. Because it depends on what your relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom is. If your relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom is very minimal or minuscule or insignificant, it means very little to you, really. You see. But if you're the kind of person who throughout the year attempt to establish some kind of real relationship with him, to the extent that you love the Baruch Shalom, you see, then you really begin to feel what that holiday means, and it has a certain imprint. But that's its essence.
Oh.
And with that,
What about Simchas Torah?
well, that's, the Simchas Torah is nothing more than the second day of Shmini Atzeres. It was added on later on. But the essence of Shmini Atzeres, which is the 8th and 9th day of Sukkot, is really a gift out of love from Baruch Shalom to Klal Yisrael before the separation to Pesach. In fact, we don't understand it, but the very great tzaddikim, the tzaddikim that they say the very great tzaddik, Rav Moshe Seifer, the Chassam Sefer, who it's written that he in the month of Tishrei, which is involved so much with Yom Tov and so on, and the whole concept of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot and so on, all these concepts, is that by the end of the month he was so elevated that by the time Sukkot finished off, it took him another month to come back down. You know what I mean? There are people who, when they take this very seriously and they understand it, and they're into that, it affects them so that literally they just go out of themselves and they become like different people. They're not involved in the regular mundane affairs. And to get back to the regular workaday world, or the regular world which we have as our own, they literally have to literally come down. That's like, because they've climbed the mountain. So by the end of Sukkot, by Shmini Atzeres, they've hit the top of the mountain, you see. So they just don't parachute down, they've literally got to begin to come down, just in order to begin to relate again with this kind of thing. But we're talking about people who are so great in their avoda, so great in their work, in their task, in the way they treat Judaism, the way they treat the mitzvahs, in the way they treat their relationship with the Baruch Shalom, in how serious it is, and they relate to the Baruch Shalom literally in a relationship out of love, not one out of fear. You see, that each of these Chagim, each of these Yom Tovim have a very powerful impression on them, you see, so that when you finish Yom Tovim at the end, just like the Baruch Shem says, it's hard for me to separate from you. So the Tzaddikim say it's very hard for us to separate ourselves likewise. So you find this enormously difficult struggle on the part of both parties, so to speak, because the Baruch Shem, of course, doesn't have a true struggle, but so to speak, anthropomorphically, in the same way.
So how can we thank him?
Well, that is the
graciousness.
That is the essence of it, and it's a symbol in the sense of his relationship to us. That the Baruch Shem ultimately is not a God of fear, you see, or a God of trepidation, or a God of punishment, but in his essence he is a God of love.
It's really
and Shmini Atzeres, it's a regular Yom Tov. Shmini Atzeres is the essence of that idea. So next week we will continue into the in-depth mechanisms of this, in terms of, like I say, some of the questions that we've asked tonight as we go on.
Good.
Yes.
We're making any announcements, you?
I just want to make an announcement just about clear the thing. Let me just make this announcement. No, just shut this down.